want you to think back to the first time you ever remember being truly afraid. What was it? Does it stick with you today? This is the sort of thing that we talk about on the House of Asher. Won't you join us? The House of Asher, a clearinghouse for the mind. And away we go. Welcome back to House of Asher. I'm your host, Steve Asher, and we are listening to episode 48. I've got to the point now where I kind of write that down. I need to keep my glasses around because half the time I need them, and I'm going to get where my pop was at, where he had one on his head, he had one on the curio, he had one in the refrigerator. Actually, on the refrigerator. I'll probably get to the point where I'll have one in the refrigerator, but knowing me. But we will proceed. It's just the joys of getting older. But so anyway, episode 48. Growing up, as I did, I saw a lot of really interesting, curious stuff. Got to read a lot of curious books, and some of the stuff that really thrilled me, because to me it was very local, was things like Edgar Cayce. And I'm assuming most of you guys know something about Edgar Cayce. He grew up in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and was, from kind of very simple means. And he had developed in time, and I'm butchering his history, but like I said, our next guest will be able to help us much more with that. Developed sort of a power of insight, and was actually able to come up with ways for people to treat ailments. And a lot of people kind of see him as sort of the modern father holistic medicine. And what's really neat is that the guy was local. A local boy. Who doesn't love a local boy? And the fact that he always seemed to stay very, very humble and very focused. And for me, that was just, it's just one of those things that you wouldn't have expected that. Most people that knew the man was an intelligent young man, but never expected that. And he had actually formed the ARE, the Association for Research and Enlightenment. And my next guest knows quite a bit about that, and I would like to go ahead and introduce him. I'll try to do this formally. Dr. Gregory Little. Mr. Little, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Steve, and not a bad introduction to Cayce there. Actually, it was pretty good.
Well, like I said, it's one of those things, again, that it's so quirky that when, because, I've actually went to visit, his grave, out of respect and things like that, because like I said, who would think something like that out of such a small little area? So, this is a Bible Belt, and I'm not saying it in a negative way, but you would probably expect, like a lot of, preachers or religious people. I mean, in his own way, I guess he was evangelizing for a certain belief and a certain certain movement.
Edgar was appreciated, though, by a lot of the ministers in the area where he was. He was a Sunday school teacher who was well respected, and back in the early 1900s anyway, Sunday school teachers were held in very high esteem, almost as much as the ministers were. Edgar was in Hopkinsville, of course, but you mentioned going to his grave. Also in Hopkinsville, there is the museum downtown, and in the museum they have a rather large display about Edgar Cayce, and it has a number of his actual artifacts and objects that he used in his psychic readings. And interestingly, if you go in there, you'll see a couch, which is a replica of Edgar's, an exact duplicate. Not exact. If it was exact, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, but it's a duplicate. And you'll see a number of other things. And I actually donated all those to them, and they were made as movie props for a film I made about Cayce. And when we were done with the movie, we didn't have anywhere we could store these, but I really just didn't want to store them. And the museum in Hopkinsville Pennyroyal Museum was more than willing to take them, and so they're on display there.
It's funny that you mentioned that. My last book, which is Hauntings of the Western Lunatic Asylum, which is in Hopkinsville, or just outside of town proper, I had went there and I was doing a book signing, and I initially actually wanted to either do it on a day where I could visit when it was when it was happening. The Edgar, the big thing was going on there. I think this year they did it in Virginia, and I was wanting to try to coincide with that, but just the stars didn't align this time. So, but I do want to get down there and actually check it out because, as I told you again, it's a fascinating story, and it's one of those deals. It's like, it's so crazy that it has to be true, for something to happen to such a kind of an unassuming person as Mr. Cayce. Do you feel like, can I touch on a little bit about kind of how that came about with
Oh, absolutely, sure. Do you want me to go ahead and tell you some stuff about him?
Oh yeah, let her rip.
Well, Edgar was born in 1877 and was a farm on Hopkinsville, and as a child he had a lot of experiences with what the Native Americans would call little people. Imaginary play children with him, and he saw dead people, literally, and he became a phenom in the area. He was an unusual student in school. He was a very poor student, and the truth is, a lot of his psychic ability started after his father was upset at him for failing some spelling tests, and his father was trying to make him study, and Edgar at the time told him that all he wanted to do was just sleep on the book, and he did. He slept on the book for about 15 minutes, but then he seemed to develop a photographic memory where his father could turn to various pages and say, "What's the fourth word down, and how do you spell it?" And Edgar would know it. He would tell him to turn to a different page, but he knew every single word in the book. At age 13, he had an experience in the woods in Hopkinsville when he was reading the Bible, and he was reading it supposedly the 13th time. Early in life, he decided that he would read the Bible one time for every year that he was alive, and he caught up at age 13. And he was reading the story of Manoah, which is a story about an angel visiting. And as he was reading this story in the woods near the farm, an angel appeared to him, a female that I interpret as an angel, and she asked him what he wanted to do with his life, and he said he wanted to heal sick people, mainly children. And the angel said it would be his. And Edgar ran home to his mother and told her. She told him not to tell anyone that, but she thought it was going to be true. Later, not too long later, around the age of 20 or so, Edgar developed the ability to go into what we would call a trance or self-hypnotic state. And he became sort of a psychic diagnostician in that he could scan a person's body and determine what was wrong with them physically, and then he would prescribe some sort of remedy. Now, keep in mind that this was right around the year, when he was doing this, was around the year 1900. And at that time, while medicine was far more advanced than it was during the Civil War, there really weren't a lot of remedies for a lot of diseases and disorders. So Edgar's his ability to do this and his remedies were so effective that his fame spread to the extent to where doctors started visiting him. And then they started bringing in groups of doctors to research him. And then they gave a presentation on his ability and some research on how effective he was in New York City at a medical convention. And that resulted in the New York Times writing an article about him, and that opened the floodgates. Suddenly, he had thousands of letters coming to him every week from all over the country, people begging for help from him. And that really began that was really the start of his story. He died in 1945, and he died at a point to where he simply couldn't keep up with doing so many of these readings for so many people. He did about 15,000 recorded readings and somewhere around 8,000 or so before they actually started writing down everything that was said in the readings. His readings covered health. About 2/3 of them were about health conditions. And actually, it was a journal, the American Medical Association, that dubbed Cayce the father of holistic medicine. And that's pretty well accepted that he really started the movement, at least in America. And his remedies, according to medical researchers, were generally 88 to 90 some percent effective. Some of it, obviously, they can't test because there's no way to find out if it worked or not. But that was just one area. He then got into the area of ancient history. That brings in Atlantis, things like mound builders, ancient history of the Americas, the pyramids, and then everything that goes bump in the night is somehow found in Cayce's readings. So that's kind of a synopsis of it.
Well, I know, just coming up, I knew he was like really a tireless steward of this gift. And, I'm trying to remember what it was. I remember years ago, it might have been In Search Of, because I mentioned In Search Of, but then again, that was sort of my bread and butter. That was like my little child's attempt at understanding research, my first steps, as it were, with it. But I knew they were talking about, like, he would go to the point where he would almost physically be ill. I mean, it drew so much from him to do a lot of these readings.
At the end, he had readings done on himself. That's actually how it started. He had an illness, and a hypnotist was visiting Hopkinsville, and he hypnotized Cayce, and they found out that Cayce, under hypnosis, could diagnose his own problem and literally fix it. Well, Cayce did this throughout his life when he had issues. He would do a reading on himself, and in his last years, he would do these readings, and the readings would keep telling him, you can't keep doing this, you're going to kill yourself. And it told him how many readings he could do a day. But he was getting bags of mail every day from desperate people. And he wasn't doing it for money. People did not have to pay him for readings. They didn't send money in for it. He did it because he felt he had an obligation. And actually, he was a photographer professionally. He made his living through photography. So, yeah, doing the readings exhausted him. The final readings that he did on himself told him that he needed to stop and rest for a while, but the conscious Edgar Cayce would not stop and rest. He just felt he had an obligation, and eventually it killed him.
Well, I mean, and not making light of the situation at all, but, I, again, being a kid of that time, read comic books, and you think of the old Spider-Man thing, with great power comes great responsibility. I doubt he was much of a Marvel reader, but I do see that similar moral compass of going, this is an extraordinary gift, and because of that, extraordinary things are expected of me. And like you said, again, due to the fact that he'd never charged for anything. And, that says a lot, because, there are some folks out there. I mean, don't get me wrong, people have to make their money. I mean, obviously, I'm not handing books out for free. I have some, but not very often. But everyone's trying to make their way. But you can generally really tell, not just in the results, the end result, but also how they come at you. The fact that he really was earnest about that. Now, I knew about the photography, which, I mean, there's still like a very big kind of Cayce's Mill, business toward Hoptown. Did he ever do anything? Because I'm thinking of around the 1900s, early 1900s. That's when they had a lot of the spirit photography, right?
Yes, he did. As far as I know, and I've seen, there's an archive that has all of Cayce's artifacts and photographs and so on stored, and those are in a locked facility in Virginia Beach at the Cayce organization. But I have been in there and seen all that. And my wife is a trustee of the Cayce organization. It's a very large membership organization and a nonprofit. But I have never seen anything close to spirit photography in anything that's there. Of course, the Cayce Library it's the largest repository of psychic and paranormal, you name it, UFOs, Bigfoot, spiritualism, everything, ancient books that go way back in time. That library has it all. So you'll find everything in spirit photography there that exists.
Okay.
But Cayce didn't take any, as far as I know.
Well, I was just curious because along those same times, that stuff could kind of cross over. I mean, I wouldn't
exactly.
I wouldn't have thought less of the guy. I would have thought, well, maybe that's just another element of his ability is to do something in regards to that. But now I knew, obviously, talking about Atlantis and I believe that kind of tied in with the kind of Pangean continents and all that stuff. He did believe in like various times, various worlds in regards of almost like a token, like, okay, well, this happened in Middle Earth, this happened in the first world, this happened in whatever. How did, I just know, like I said, I'm not saying I was necessarily the absolute worst student in the world. There's other stuff I'd much rather have done, and I did. But how in the world did that just click? How in the world did he keep all that in his head?
Well, he claimed he didn't keep it in his head. He claimed that Edgar Cayce, the man, in his conscious state, smoked, drank, went fishing all the time, did a little farming and vegetable gardening, did his photography, liked to tell jokes, liked to party. But when he went into that trance, when it came to somebody wanting a reading and he went into that trance, Edgar Cayce, the man, was gone. And it wasn't that he was being possessed. He said, his reading said that what was happening was his conscious mind was going to a place called the Akashic Record, and that everything that existed was written on that Akashic Record. And it gave an example. It said, just like, and some people won't know this example. If you got young people, they may have never seen a vinyl record. A vinyl record has grooves in it, and the grooves are vibrations that are made from the sound. So when you put the needle in there and the needle goes and the record goes around and around, the needle moves through the grooves, it produces the same sound that produced the grooves in the record. That is the way that Cayce's source said that everything in the universe is recorded. It said that it's recorded in vibrations, and it's finally kept in what it described as the Akashic Record. So Cayce had access to this Akashic Record, and the Akashic Record was able to talk about people and individuals, but it also had history encoded in it. So wherever this information came from, it was being handed to Cayce's unconscious mind that he would then speak when he was in this hypnotic trance. So these are psychic readings that he gave. His readings about history didn't emerge until, I believe it was 1924, and it was done in a time and in a place when Cayce didn't expect it. Up to that time, Edgar was only giving health readings. And then all of a sudden, while he was in this trance state, the people that were there asking him the questions just started asking him about the past world, asking him questions about history. And he simply answered in that trance state. So yes, the history of Atlantis came out. Mu, or Lemuria, if you prefer to call it that, the history came out. In a lot of his readings, he gave dates of when these lost continents occurred and where they were, where pieces of them would be found. On In Search Of, for example, you probably saw the episode when they were looking at the Bimini Road or the Bimini Wall and in Search of Atlantis episode.
Right.
And Cayce talked a great deal about that. That's a place where my wife and we spent 26 weeks in the Bahamas on our own boat, using our own equipment, our own side scan sonar, looking around the Bahamas, following up on Cayce's readings. That's another whole story. But Cayce actually, when that history came out, it disturbed him and his wife because they were very, very deeply religious. They were Christians, and it disturbed him. He even stopped doing readings for a while. He and his wife talked about it, and what they decided is that the readings had helped so many people up to that point that they would continue with doing the readings. However, if it ever hurt someone, they would immediately stop. And they never stopped doing the readings, and not a single person ever reported that they were hurt by an Edgar Cayce reading.
Well, you were talking about when he's doing the talking about the Akashic history and all this and that. I mean, this is really, pardon me, before maybe just at the advent of really understanding a lot about how radio signals go out into, I mean, they're picking stuff up like bouncing back of like I Love Lucy, episodes and stuff. So that stuff just
They go
keeps going.
forever.
It just keeps going.
Forever.
And,
Yeah.
like you said, I mean, we know now the lights that we're seeing from stars now are, thousands, if not millions of years old.
Millions.
Odds are a lot of those stars aren't even there anymore, at least in that configuration. And I think people now, and when I say that, I don't think that we are any brighter. I think we might have maybe certain, in some ways I think we're not as bright, because I think some of our basics stuff that we've lost, but we have traded that in for technology, and we traded that in for technical expertise. And I think that if the people then maybe have had some of the same technology now, they might have been more apt to accept it, because well, look at us, we're using these machines and we're doing this and that to talk, clear across the world and whatnot. So, it's strange that, it's got to be strange, when he goes to talk to these people, and then the initial meeting of this guy, kind of an unassuming guy, and he's telling about all this sort of stuff. It's got to be just a very bizarre. I would really have loved to have been a fly on the wall in those rooms, just due to the fact that it's one of those, almost like a first contact, to use sort of a Star Trek thing. How it could go a whole lot of different ways.
Yeah. Well, there's millions of people that wish they could have been a fly on the wall. And in all the talks that I do on Cayce and all the shows I've done talking about Edgar Cayce, it comes up again, and people ask again and again, well, what did Cayce think about this or that? And I'd give the answer, and they say, okay, then what about the next thing? And the thing that's really frustrating, it's all written down. There's over 50,000 pages of everything Cayce said in these psychic readings in the ARE library, and ARE members get access to it all online. It's all digitized. But what bothers me more than anything, it's like, okay, they didn't ask the next question. And the truth is, when people go in for these readings, it's the same thing we do with I guess that people, I don't go for psychic readings, but some people go in and they're interested in themselves. And most people that got a reading from Edgar Cayce wanted to know things like, what sort of job should I go for? Should I go to this school? What about marrying this person? And we're interested in ourselves. We're interested in practical day-to-day things. And there are loads of questions I wish people would have asked, but they simply didn't, for reasons that I can understand. Loads of things. There's countless things that Cayce talked about that I wish somebody had asked the next question.
Right. Well, I mean,
it's frustrating.
Well, that's that thing of we are very short-sighted as a race and have a lot of historical amnesia, and like you said, we can't see past the tip of our nose a lot of times. And I'm almost sure that someone went in there and it's like, well, I've got these two heifers, which one's going to make it to the state fair, because I could sure sell that other and make money right now. I mean, real
and that's
meats
what
and potatoes
to them in the moment.
Right.
That's what mattered to them in the moment, and I understand.
Right, but if I were maybe in that room now, who knows what I would have asked him when I was a kid, but probably something about, will I ever be like the Bionic Man or something like that. But I would be going, hey, tell me about all those lost years that Jesus lived. Tell me what all went on there. Tell me, what connections, is there one true God? Is what is this and that?
Well, he did say there's one true God. He did. He was the things that came out in his spirituality and when people ask him about God and Jesus and other religious leaders over the years and spiritual leaders, Cayce was pretty much in line with basic Christianity. He really was. He talked about Christ consciousness. In fact, it may be that the term Christ consciousness originated with Cayce. I'm not certain that's the case, but I believe it is. A lot of his readings talk about that just point blank. He doesn't really talk bad about other religious leaders and other religions, but he pretty much is mainstream Christianity.
Yeah. Well, something that I would say, and this is again coming purely from my subjective reasoning of looking at it, it seems like, especially after that, due to the fact that he always held to not going too far down the path, and and he kept his respectability and kept respect, like you said, of existing religious power structures, that it eased open the gate to where people didn't have to be purely dogmatic, and they could be more of a spiritual animal as opposed to necessarily having I have to go ask my priest, or I have
Right.
to do this and that. They can commune with God more directly and be open to it, which is kind of what he did. I mean, like you said, he said he spoke to an angel, and the angel gave him this information, which, and I'm sure a billion people come to you and says, well, maybe that angel, or maybe it was an alien, or maybe it was a trans-dimensional being, or maybe, what is an angel? It's a entity from another universe, another whatever.
Well, you mentioned that. Cayce said that we do come from the stars, but we are energy sources. We are soul beings, little godlings is a way to put it. He didn't use that term. But we are soul energy beings that inhabit physical bodies, and that we chose these physical bodies. And he also had the idea that we would return to the stars as energy beings. And we hop from planet to planet in Cayce. But several Cayce readings do, in fact, there are 3 that, in fact, mention what are obvious references to ancient astronauts visiting the Earth. One of them was in the Yucatan, the Maya lands. That's a very clear reference. Remember, this was done in the 1930s, even before a lot of these sites were found in the Yucatan. And another one had to do with the time of Atlantis, back roughly around 10,000 BC, before the final destruction of Atlantis, before the main island sank. And the Atlanteans supposedly were communicating with, it can only be aliens, otherworldly intelligences, and they received a message that there was a destruction coming from space and Atlantis was going to be destroyed. So they needed to take action to preserve the records of Atlantis. That is a second one. There are 3 altogether of all of his readings that are very clearly alien in nature or extraterrestrial.
Well, I mean, it depends on who you talk to, I guess. I mean, I always kind of considered us. I mean, it's like you always hear people say, well, they're us and we're them. That's a very popular viewpoint nowadays. At one time, that would have been heresy. But as people's minds open up to different things, and I just think in time, you are, I won't say indoctrinated, but you have enough of that it's the shock factor is lessened, and it's not as scary anymore. You kind of are immersed in more of a free thought, which nowadays it's probably a lot more common. I mean, especially if you go to places like California, and I mean, we even have sort of a little had sort of like a esoteric shop here, and they would do readings and cleansing and things like that, and that's what I think most people that haven't been kind of into life or researched this much, that's what they think. They think it's all kind of Californian, hippy dippy stuff, and most people don't realize that a lot of that in our world, and in America anyway, come from this. In a lot of ways, it's a very simple man.
Yeah, that's true. You'll find the shops everywhere around the country. You will find people that believe in psychic phenomena everywhere. By the way, I'll mention this. I know you're beginning to run down on time, but this thing about aliens and so on and people's fear of it and thinking it's crazy. Carl Sagan, who was, at least at one time, the most respected astronomer of all time, maybe he's been pushed to second place or so, but anyway, Carl Sagan is the big name of the 60s and 70s. Carl Sagan wrote an article in a highly prestigious astronomy journal back in 1963. And in that journal, he calculated the odds of alien life around the universe, which a lot of other astronomers have done too. He also then calculated the odds of how many of those civilizations would be advanced, also how many of those civilizations would be greatly advanced beyond us, And finally, how many of those civilizations would have been likely to visit the Earth? Sagan actually decided and concluded that the Earth has been visited in ancient times and that it is an absolute certainty. And he gave a number in there. He said the Earth has probably been visited somewhere between 10,000 to 100,000 times by alien life. Some of it would have been robotic in its nature, or artificial intelligence. And he suggested, too, that archaeologists go and take a look in ancient Sumeria to find the evidence. That came from Carl Sagan. You seldom hear of that because the skeptics and others really don't want to mention that Carl Sagan's on the side of all the ancient alien people.
Well, it kind of goes against party lines, though, too. I mean, people talk about, and I've said this before, and I have a lot of friends that are religious. It's kind of like, that guy, it's not that's a racist. So I have a lot of black friends, but I mean, I do have, you can't not have people that you like here that are religious. A lot of people are. I have a lot of people that are atheist. I have a lot of people that are different faiths, and some people that are, just whatever, just sort of agnostic, kind of more like I would be. But, there's a certain dogmatic view, especially in hardline scientific what I'm going to say, circles, academia, where it's just like, well, nope, we say it's not worthy, don't talk about it. And it's like, how are you calling yourself a scientist if you completely knock out the ability to even question something?
Well, it's all about belief. Everything is about belief.
Right.
And there's a quote, I'm not sure who came up with it first, but it's, would you rather believe or would you rather know? Now, I want to believe, but I'd much rather know the truth. There are certain things I really want to believe in, But then again, the truth to me is more important, and to some extent that's driven what I have done and what my wife and I have done together, looking for the truth in certain things. What is the truth about certain things out there and certain ideas, whether it's Atlantis or whether it's Indian mounds or anything else? I'm more interested in the truth.
Right. Well, and there's that thing of, because I talk to different people. I do have like a little research group. It's called the Caldwell County Paranormals, and we never called ourselves something ghost hunters. We don't hunt anything. There's nothing hanging on our wall. We don't, the whole concept of the hunt thing on this, I think, is a little aggro. And it's a thing of, I think a lot of people do believe in ghosts. They do believe in Bigfoot. They do, but there's always that thinking, more linear thinking, people going, look, we don't believe in anything. We're curious about it. We've, over time and talking to different people, they have presented certain things that they feel is factual. So there's definitely a curiosity there, but belief, again, denotes almost a religious fervor. And then you get into that, you get blinders on, and you can't be subjective.
That's absolutely true. It's perceptual bias that occurs that's driven by a belief. And so the skeptics have a belief that all this stuff is complete nonsense. And that's their belief. They are believers in their own side of it. And then there's believers that believe in everything. Every single thing. Every UFO report is real. Every Bigfoot sighting is real. And that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle.
Right. So I was going to say, like the Inquirer is like, as a scientific journal. Elvis is, flying around with, Bill Clinton and Sasquatch.
Hey, I'm in Memphis. I'm in Memphis, and I have friends that knew Elvis.
I'm not
judging.
I actually was going to tell you before we get too silly.
He's here with me right now.
That's great. Get an autograph for me, please. I actually I was in Memphis a few years back. I hadn't really mentioned this to you off air, but I played like music off and on for years, and like rock bands, metal bands, punk bands, all kinds of stuff. And I actually got to go play they had a big punk festival down there. And one of the things I got to do, I did not get to go visit Graceland, nor did I get to meet Jim Dandy from Black Oak, Arkansas, which is one of my dreams. I'm going to have him on this show. But what I did do, I was able to go down to the Mississippi and kind of put my hands in it. And some people go, man, hope you washed them. It just depends on where you're at on the Mississippi. But I kind of anointed my in myself a little bit, and my gear with just a little touch of the mud on it, which I didn't really think about that being kind of a grounding, a ritual in a way, but it felt right.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
know,
By the
and
way, I live in downtown. I live downtown Memphis, and on an island downtown, right by the river.
wow. Well, I might have been within hollering distance, as we say
It
here.
probably was. And near the pyramid, did you go to was the pyramid there at the time?
When yeah, I think so. I was coming down through. Oh, good Lord, I'm trying to think, because when we come down there at first, I actually went over the bridge and went into Arkansas, and I was like, "Hey guys, we're in Arkansas." So
Gotcha.
we were that close. We were at the
Yeah.
oh, I'm trying to think of it. It was like a large music. Oh, what is it
Oh,
called? It was
music
right.
fest.
It was right
Memphis.
downtown. It was a Memphis. It was
Memphis
called
Event.
Memphis. No, well, no, I wish no, it was not that high minded. It was just called Memphis Punk Fest, and
Oh, okay.
we were downtown because we went
Yeah.
out back because some of the boys wanted to take a break after the show, and they had a beer and was smoking, and I kept hearing pop 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 pop. I said, y'all got a holiday going on? He says, no, those are guns. I said, should we go inside? And he says, nah, they're not that. They're down the ways. And I was like,
Yeah.
"Man, I hear guns, I go inside." But
We have
there's
the seventh largest pyramid in the world is here in Memphis.
Yeah.
And it's a vast pro shop now. It was built for what was then Memphis State University, now the University of Memphis, but it's the seventh largest pyramid.
That's
Uh,
I'm
yeah.
trying to kind of wrap my head around a pyramid, and it becomes a Bass Pro Shop.
It is.
That's
Yeah, it's a
strange.
vast pro shop.
That's strange.
It's unbelievable. The inside of the pyramid has a swamp in it, and all the boats that they sell are down there. It's rather amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting.
Well, let me ask you something
Sure.
before we get too off into like you said, into another subject. As you know, time is getting closer. Now I know just looking you up on Amazon, I'm seeing like 43, at least 43 books that you've done and are connected with, like Edgar Cayce and all that stuff. How many books have you wrote? Because it seems like a bunch.
Well, I have 66 books that were published, and out of that, 62 of them are still in print. I've got 5 coming out in January, and then I have 1 coming out not this September or next month, but a year from next month. That's already at the publisher. That one I'm doing with the British author Andrew Collins, and it's written and in the publisher's hands. It just takes a year for it to get out.
Well,
So that's how many, 60 some.
well, that's what I try to tell people, because I was just saying, I didn't mean to walk what you're saying. They don't understand. It's I compare it to like, you remember the old sausage machines, and they'd have the skins. You got to keep pushing meat in, and well, okay, I've already got 2 books in, and it's got to go through this process, and then you're going to get the sausage. But that's what I would try to explain to him. He says, well, how many books have you written? I said, well, published 2, but there's, I've got these other 2, and I've got 4 more I'm working on. It's like, oh, when are they coming out? They come out this year? No, that's not how that works. They don't understand. It's it's like a train track. You can't just pull one out in front of the other one. It's all going to derail. There's a system to it. So, but
That's true. There is. And now, when you get into it, and you get people saying they're desperate for you to get this book in their hands, or the manuscript, then you start being more like a train. But it can wear some people down. I know professional authors, that's all they do. They're writers, and the most they can do is write a book about every 2 years or so. A lot of mine are treatment books, and when I say treatment, they're used for substance abusers and for trauma. For example, I've got books being sent to all the VA hospitals in the country that are dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. So
that's great.
that's an example of one. But I have a lot of treatment books, and about 30 or so that are in this field.
See, and that's what we were kind of discussing somewhat off air, is that there's so much that goes on behind the scenes of this. Like you said, people get just like a glimpse of the door and go, oh, well, you're a writer. Well, yeah, there's a mountain of other stuff going on. I did want to ask you, though, did you want to throw out any web pages, any upcoming things you're going to, anything that you want to mention in the minutes that we have left?
Well, I don't do many conferences anymore, but next month I am doing one in Little Rock, but I think it's already sold out. It's got like 750 people at it, and it's called Arcalantis. and you can look it up if you want to, but I think it's sold out. I know the hotel is sold out. Other than that, the only thing I'll say is go to edgarcayce.org, edgarcayce.org, and you can find out everything you need to know about Edgar Cayce there. My stuff can be found all over the place, my books, but you can go to apmagazine.info, and that's a good starting place. But other than that, I really don't have anything to push. I just enjoy talking about Cayce and enjoy talking to good people like you and your listeners, who I don't know yet, but maybe I'll talk to them.
Well, I'm sure I'm hoping to get very good feedback from this, because like I said, it's one of these things that I hate when people just go and just do like little news bites on things, and they don't really get into the meat and the marrow, as it were, of the person, and the actual life is there. It's just like kind of like doing genealogy, which I've done a fair amount of that. Behind every picture, behind every signature, there's a life, and there's joy, and there's hardship, and there's loss, and there's discovery, and there's warts and all. Everybody, like you said, everyone is human, and it's wonderful to put a real tactile person into that, as opposed to, like you said, a statue or a large plaque. But yeah. But I'll tell you.
By the way, one more thing I'd like to mention.
Wait on.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go right ahead.
Well, your people are in the Hopkinsville area. There's this famous case called the Kelly-Hopkinsville case that occurred not too far from where Edgar Cayce was born. Mm-hmm. Tremendously validated UFO case with alien beings. It's where the little green men stuff came from, that idea. There's a festival in Hopkinsville every year, the Kelly-Hopkinsville Little Green Man Festival. So go to that, and you might actually – I've written about that in several of my books that came out in the 80s and the 90s. I've been writing for a long time. But that's another interesting thing about your area. It's great.
I actually Miss Stith, Geraldine Stith, which is the lady who had put a lot of those books out herself. That's her family. She was one of the people who kind of helped me through my first stumbling of my first book. Because I'm not a writer by vocation, or by whatever. It just sort of happened. And I'm actually studying. Are you familiar with the Stanford UFO that happened out in eastern Kentucky?
I've heard of it, but I can't remember. There's too many UFO cases.
No, well, it's so strange because, again, I'm sort of like, I kind of jokingly call myself the Joe Franklin of the paranormal, because I love pulling in all these different people, for the people that remember Joe Franklin, but to pull all these different things that kind of intercross. I was speaking to a guy named Bob McGee, who was a horror host back in the old days when I was a kid in Nashville, called The Count to Five. Well, we had touched base. He was one of a big influence when I was a kid, and I touched base, and I actually had him on the show, and he was telling me about the Stanford UFO, and it was extremely interesting. I'm actually in touch with a woman who made a play about that, and I'm hoping to maybe have her on here in maybe the next month or so. But I'll tell you what, you're right about the time. Mr. Little, bless you. I appreciate having you on. What I'm going to do here, as people will hear me now, playing a little outro. I do want to thank everybody for coming, and this was episode 48. Go out and enjoy the rest of your day.
And a pleasure.
And thank you again for being here. And I want everybody to go out there, have fun, love each other, love yourselves, and don't be afraid to explore. But also, don't be afraid to let yourself be a little scared. Sometimes you learn things in fear, and we learn things about ourselves in fear. And if you can overcome them, you'll be stronger for it. And until next time, God bless everybody. Until I see you again. Goodbye.